Now, to wrap up this morning's session, I'm privileged to introduce our keynote speaker. Philip Brumley is General Counsel for Jehovah's Witnesses, the World Headquarters Offices, and he will be presenting on the topic, Jehovah's Witnesses, Canaries in the Coal Mine of Human Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Brumley.
So it's a real privilege to be here at the Jackson Center and to commemorate the 75th anniversary of this victory of West Virginia versus Barnette. And of course, we want to thank Mr. Kathman, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Loftus for what they've done for the Office of Public Information and collaborating with the Jackson Center. As mentioned, the title of our consideration is Jehovah's Witnesses, Canaries in the Coal Mine of Human Rights. Mining is a very dangerous job. You hear of mining collapses all the time, but do you know that miners face another danger, and it's poisonous gas that they are not aware of? Did you know that as recently as 1980, coal miners had the custom of carrying canaries with them as they worked deep in the earth? Because of their anatomy, canaries receive one dose of oxygen when they breathe in and another dose of oxygen when they breathe out. And as a result, they get a double dose of air. But that means that canaries are more susceptible to toxic gases like carbon monoxide and methane. So the miners knew that if the canary started to show signs of distress, they had to get out. And if they didn't get out, it could cost them their life. Well, even as those miners depended on canaries to save their lives, when it comes to human rights, as I'm going to explain in the next few minutes, Jehovah's Witnesses are the canaries in the coal mine of human rights. In the following minutes, I'd like to discuss 4 questions with you and respond to them. First, are Jehovah's Witnesses social activists? If not, then why are they engaged in so much litigation? And why are the legal struggles of Jehovah's Witnesses, the canaries of the coal mine of human rights, of interest to you and to me? And finally, how have the victories obtained by Jehovah's Witnesses enhanced human rights, not just here in the United States, but worldwide? So let me tell you a little story. Some time ago, a small group of Jehovah's Witnesses were gathered to study the Bible. There was very few witnesses in the area, so they weren't meeting in a kingdom hall, but rather in a private home. This evening, something unusual happened. 3 men knocked on the door and asked if they could join this small group in their study of the Bible. So, of course, the group was surprised and invited these gentlemen in. They gave them a Bible and the publication they were studying. What the witnesses didn't know is that these men were government agents. They'd come to spy on this small group. And later at trial, they testified against the small group, and as a result, 4 of those witnesses were convicted of sedition and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Now, as I told you that story, what country comes to your mind? Would that be Russia? Maybe China? Saudi Arabia? No, this happened in 1918 in San Bernardino, California. The ones arrested were Edward Ham, E.J. Sonnenberg, Mr. Stevens, and Emma Martin. Doesn't she look like a criminal? What was their crime? What had they done to deserve sentencing to prison? They were using a copy of the finished mystery in connection with their study of the Bible. Earlier that same year, 1919, the leadership of the International Bible Students Association, as Jehovah's Witnesses were known then, were convicted of espionage for having written and distributed the finished mystery. And these gentlemen were sentenced to 20 years in the federal penitentiary for having produced that book, which leads to the obvious question, what was so dangerous about the finished mystery? Well, with remarkable clarity, that publication documented the failings of the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. Now, unable to challenge the accuracy of what was in the book, the church used its political influence to convince federal authorities that Jehovah's Witnesses were nothing more than agents of the German government helping Germany win the First World War. It wasn't just the Catholic Church that went after Jehovah's Witnesses. Protestant leaders joined in as well. One Reverend Weiland said this in the Daily Telegram. That's a newspaper that used to be produced in Brooklyn. One of your patriotic duties that confronts you as citizens is the suppression of the International Bible Students Association with headquarters in Brooklyn. They have, under the guise of religion, been carrying on German propaganda. Ludicrous. Just 1 year later, after the leadership had spent less than a year in prison, the actual ludicrousness of the conviction was seen to all, and the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses was released, where they were released and set free. 1 year later, 1920, the 4 witnesses I talked to you about earlier went to prison, even after the leadership had been released. They went to prison on May 17, 1920. They were sentenced to 3 years, as I mentioned. Ham, Sonnenberg, and Stephen went to McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary. Back then, California didn't have a federal penitentiary for women. So Emma Martin was sentenced to San Quentin State Penitentiary. On June 20th, Sunday evening, across the United States, Jehovah's Witnesses sent telegrams to President Wilson condemning what had happened. The very next morning, Monday, June 21st, Wilson pardoned all 4, and they were immediately released from prison. So what I've just described for you this morning are the first 2 legal battles of Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're certainly not the last. The last time we were in front of the Supreme Court of the United States was in 2002, and that had to do with litigation between Jehovah's Witnesses and the town of Stratton, Ohio. During the 1990s, the municipal authorities in Stratton had insisted that Jehovah's Witnesses obtain written permission from the municipal authorities before they could go door to door. Efforts were made to try to resolve the conflict, but to no avail. The matter was taken to court. Jehovah's Witnesses actually lost in the district court and on the circuit court as well, and then took the case to the Supreme Court. On July 17, 2002, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Jehovah's Witnesses 8-1. Rehnquist was the only dissenter. Now, over the ensuing days following the decision in Watchtower versus Stratton, uniformly, across the board, legal scholars praised the Supreme Court for what it had done. But let me just share with you one quote. This is from Charles C. Haynes, the senior scholar of the First Amendment Center. He said this: Jehovah's Witnesses have done it again. They've chalked up their 48th Supreme Court victory. Pause. He missed 2. The number is actually 50. We'll continue. An extraordinary line of cases that have significantly expanded First Amendment protections for all Americans. Now notice what Mr. Haynes added. We all owe the Jehovah's Witnesses a debt of gratitude. No matter how many times they're insulted, run out of town, or even physically attacked, they keep on fighting for their, and thus our, freedom of religion. And when they win, we all win. So that's the legal history of Jehovah's Witnesses since 1918 to 2002. Now, that leads us then to our first question. Are Jehovah's Witnesses social activists? Do you know the numbers could suggest so? Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide, if you're taking notes, this is worth writing, worldwide have obtained 371 Supreme Court victories in 63 countries. Now that includes 50 victories here in the United States and 62 favorable decisions before the European Court of Human Rights. But that leads us then to the second question. Why are Jehovah's Witnesses involved in so much litigation? Now, to answer this question, we have to go back to the Bible to understand a little bit about the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses. So just as a foundation, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the Bible is the Word of God. Then you have to obey what's written in the Bible. So one of the standards in the Bible is found in Romans 13:1. It says the following: Let every person be in subjection to the superior authorities, for there is no authority except by God. The existing authorities stand placed in their relative positions by God. So do you get the point? A general standard followed by Jehovah's Witnesses is that to have God's approval, you should be a loyal, honest citizen. So remember when Lillian Gabitis was asked at trial, and this is part of the transcript, her attorney asked, "Do you believe in being loyal to your country?" Answer, Yes. Do you obey the school regulations in Minersville in general? Answer, yes. Is saluting the flag the only regulation you had any difficulty with? Yes. So Lillian wanted to be obedient, loyal citizen as far as she could. But you remember in Romans 13:1, the Bible uses the word relative authority. So there's an exception to this standard, and that is when secular laws conflict with divine mandate. So let me share one of those divine mandates with you. It's found in Matthew 28:18-20. Now this is after the resurrection of Jesus, and he approaches his followers, the disciples and apostles. And the verses read like this. Jesus approached and said to them, all authority, I'm going to pause here, all authority. That meant, according to Jesus, authority in heaven, authority on earth. He said, all authority has been given me in heaven and on earth. Go, therefore, and make disciples of people of all the nations, teaching them to observe all the things I have commanded you. And look, I am with you all the days until the conclusion of the system of things. So there was a divine mandate to talk to others about their faith. And the early Christians did just that. Not months after the ascension of Jesus to heaven, the apostles were called in before the high court in Jerusalem because they had been talking about Jesus. Now the high court said to the apostles, I'm quoting, we strictly ordered you not to keep teaching on the basis of this name, and yet look, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching. Now what would the apostles respond? So these are famous words. This is found in Acts 5:29. In answer, Peter and the other apostles said, we must obey God as ruler rather than men. So you may not agree with the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, and you may not understand all the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, but these are the guiding principles that motivate their conduct. To be law-abiding as far as possible, to be loyal citizens, but when push comes to shove, and the secular authorities demand something of Jehovah's Witnesses that conflicts with what they understand the Bible to teach, there's no discussion, there's no debate. Jehovah's Witnesses have to follow what is written in the Bible. So let me answer those first two questions. Are Jehovah's Witnesses social activists? The answer is no. Jehovah's Witnesses view litigation as a solution of last resort. But then why are they before the courts so often? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses resort to litigation only on those few occasions when subjection to secular law would bring them into conflict with divine mandate. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I get down to the question you're interested in. Why should all this matter to you? Many of you aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, most of you. So what relevance does this have in your life? Well, let me reason on that a minute. You woke up yesterday. The younger ones, you went to school. Others went to work. Maybe they had household chores to take care of. Or maybe yesterday was a day of leisure. You could just relax and take it easy. But as you went around your life yesterday, you did whatever you did without even thinking, most likely, about the fundamental freedoms, the fundamental rights you enjoyed. For example, it never crossed your mind that if you wanted to go talk to your neighbors, let's say here in Jamestown, you'd first have to go downtown and get written permission from some municipal authority to go talk to your neighbors. That wouldn't even come into your mind. It never came into your mind that you could be forced, if you're in school, to say something you didn't believe, or that if you have children in school, that your children could be forced to say something that they didn't believe. And it certainly didn't come into your mind yesterday that if you happened to talk to somebody about your faith, or if you're an atheist and wanted to talk about the fact that you were an atheist and others should be atheists as well, that you could go to jail just for saying those things. Well, here's the point. At crucial turning points in the history of the United States, groups of people, notably Jehovah's Witnesses, stood up and challenged the authorities when those rights were challenged or threatened. Thus, when it comes to human rights, Jehovah's Witnesses are the canaries. 3 points here. History and current events confirm that worldwide Jehovah's Witnesses are one of the first groups to be threatened with the loss of civil and fundamental rights. Second point, history and current events also confirm that when the rights of Jehovah's Witnesses are threatened, the rights of others will soon be undermined as well. And then conversely, history and current events confirm that when Jehovah's Witnesses are successful in defending their rights, the rights of the majority are similarly benefited. Now let me give you two historical examples of this. You know, Jehovah's Witnesses go door to door, talk to people about their faith. Maybe on Saturday morning they rang your doorbell and you wonder, who is bothering me at this hour? And maybe it was even a little irritating to you that they came and wanted to talk to you. So why do Jehovah's Witnesses go door to door? And what have the courts have to say about this? Well, during the 1920s and the 1930s, a real effort was made to talk to others about their faith. And as a result of this, it was not uncommon for Jehovah's Witnesses to be arrested. This is just one example. The journalist had a little fun with the word letter J. 76 Jehovites jailed in Joliet. So Joliet is a little town near Chicago. When the witnesses would come to town, the police and the municipal authorities would round them up and put them in jail just as fast as they could. And as a result of this, the cases started winding their way through the courts. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court started drowning in Jehovah's Witnesses' appeals. By 1939, the Supreme Court had rendered 5 decisions, all confirming the right of free speech, freedom of religion, that witnesses could do just what they were doing. But in spite of these 5 victories, municipal authorities continued arresting Jehovah's Witnesses. And the Supreme Court thought, what can we do to stem this tide of Jehovah's Witness appeal? Finally, in 1940, they found what they thought was the ideal case. This involved Newton, Jesse, and Russell Cantwell in New Haven, Connecticut. They were arrested. The case wound its way up to the Supreme Court. May 20th, 1940, unanimously, the Supreme Court held in favor of the Cantwell family. Now, let me read you one sentence that shows you a turning point in the progression of American jurisprudence. The court said this: the First Amendment declares that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I'm going to pause. So, ladies and gentlemen, up to Cantwell, the Supreme Court had interpreted the First Amendment as protecting people in the United States from wrongs committed by federal authorities. But who was arresting Jehovah's Witnesses? Not the federal authorities. It was the municipal authorities. So in a landmark turnaround, the Supreme Court added this sentence: the 14th Amendment has rendered the legislatures of the states, meaning Connecticut, as incompetent as Congress to enact such laws. This was a shift, and it significantly expanded the protection of the First Amendment. So as an American today, you're protected under the First Amendment not just by wrongs committed by federal authorities, but wrongs committed by state and municipal authorities. Who won that right for you? Jehovah's Witnesses. But just 2 weeks after this unanimous decision in Cantwell, the Supreme Court handed down the crushing defeat that we've talked about this morning in Minersville School District versus Gobitis. You know the issue. Can young school children be forced to pledge allegiance when doing so would violate their religious beliefs? The state fought vigorously to the effect that the government had the authority, in fact, had to do what they were doing. In their brief to the Supreme Court, the state said this: such a demonstration of disrespect, that is, refusing to salute, to our government will influence and affect other pupils in the school and the morale of the respective communities, and ultimately of the nation itself, will be shaken and demoralized. Now, do you get the point there in common English? The state was saying, if we let children of Jehovah's Witnesses refuse to salute the flag, that could infect other students, and in turn infect their parents, and in turn infect the feeling of patriotism across the United States. We might even lose the war. So that was the argument, a very powerful argument. By an 8-1 margin, the Gobitis court agreed with the state. They said this: a society which is dedicated to the preservation of freedom may in self-protection, do you get the point? Gobitis Court said basically to protect our very survival, we're going to obligate these students to say something they don't believe. Now, when the case came down, as you've heard from the fine ladies who spoke this morning, it wasn't just an esoteric decision about whether or not to salute the flag. The message received in the United States as a result of the Gobitis decision was, Jehovah's Witnesses are bad. They're a threat to the survival of the United States. And this unleashed a wave of persecution during the early 40s, the likes of which have never been seen since. Notice this short video clip describing what happened.
On June 3rd, 1940, the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 against Jehovah's Witnesses, a ruling that would rock the country. Within days of the Gobitis decision, the Kingdom Hall in Kennebunk, Maine was torched. In Illinois, a mob attacked witnesses as they were preaching, turning over their cars and destroying their literature. In Winsboro, Texas, witness Oscar Pillars was attacked by a mob that was determined to make him salute the flag.
They brought me to him. By now, they had the flag there, and they wanted me to salute that. They would hold up my hand in this fashion, and I'd let my hand drop. And of course, that made them very angry.
The mob threw the rope over a pipe and then pulled Pillars up. He woke up in jail and near death.
The next thing I knew was a doctor was bringing me to. The marshal said, and this put great courage back into me. The marshal said, "He is the most stubborn devil I've ever seen in my life." So I knew then that I had not compromised.
Some were tarred and feathered, others were run out of town, several were castrated, and this was not just from one or two communities, but literally from Maine to California, from Washington to Georgia. Not just this clip, but as you've heard from Professor Zai last night and in the program this morning, as a result of the mob violence against Jehovah's Witnesses, the country started to take notice of what was happening. One historian, John Noonan, said this: "The legal, meaning the police helped, and illegal, meaning the police did not interfere, persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses from 1941 to 1943 was the greatest outbreak of religious intolerance in 20th century America." Now, an interesting little factoid. During these same 3 years of intense persecution, Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States grew by an average of 15% per year, from 48 to 72,000 over those same 3 years. But this takes us now to West Virginia versus Barnette. As so capably demonstrated this morning, the mistreatment of Jehovah's Witnesses hit the conscience of every honest-hearted American. And the Supreme Court also had a conscience, and it realized that it had made a big mistake with Gobitis. So much so that when Walter Barnette brought his case to court, the district court ruled in favor of the Barnette family. And of course, the matter went all the way to the Supreme Court. And this resulted in the famous decision that we're commemorating this day, 75 years later. The Supreme Court said, as has been mentioned, those who begin coercive elimination of dissent soon find themselves exterminating dissenters. Compulsory unification of opinion achieves only the unanimity of the graveyard. So that's the flag salute issue. But ladies and gentlemen, I want you to take a step back for a minute. Put the flag salute issue on the shelf for a minute. Barnette also stands for something very big, very different from just the flag salute issue. In the Gobitis decision, Justice Frankfurter had argued strenuously that government had the right to compel the flag salute, and that when government obligated people to do something, people should obey. His thought was that at that time, this was required in order to save the unanimity of the government. But as was said in the Barnette decision, the very purpose of a Bill of Rights was to withdraw certain subjects from the vicissitudes of political controversy. The basic point being that the court did stand in the place to protect individual rights. So the shift was, under Frankfurter, if you don't like what the law is, vote in a new legislature, because the legislature should change things. The Barnette case said, wait a minute, minorities will never be able to win an election, will never be able to protect themselves in the legislature. It's up to the courts to protect religious freedom and minorities. This is what Phil Donahue said earlier this morning. The reaction to the Barnette decision, as you know, was uniformly positive. The Christian Century said this: by this flag salute decision, this court has cleared up a whole range of cases involving freedom of conscience, all of them an outgrowth of the activities of Jehovah's Witnesses. The constitutional guarantees of religious liberty have been affirmed. So you know, when you have an occasion like this, you tend to overstate things. And you might even think, well, this program was really excellent, but really, didn't they all kind of go over the top with what they were saying? Let me tell you categorically that legal scholars recognize Barnette as the single most important decision of the Supreme Court. For example, Professor Sunstein of Harvard said this. He was asked to select the 5 most important Supreme Court decisions, and then of those 5, which of the 5 was the best? And he said this: if we had to preserve just one Supreme Court opinion to show some other civilization what American constitutional law is all about, I'd pick the Barnette case. And he's not alone. Professor Herzl of the University of Oklahoma said this: Barnette ranks among the most important and enduring Supreme Court cases in terms of free speech jurisprudence. I would deem it without question the most important case in Supreme Court history, a fixed star in the constitutional firmament. So let me go back to my third question. What does all of this have to do with you, particularly if you're not Jehovah's Witnesses? Without puffing, without any kind of pride, to say what history brings out, Jehovah's Witnesses have stood up at important times in the history of the United States to fight for their rights. And in so doing, they guaranteed the rights for all Americans. But before concluding, I want to make 2 sobering points. I really hope you take this to heart. The point is that fundamental freedoms can be won and fundamental freedoms can be lost. Second point, the battle continues. Can I underline that? The battle continues. For example, when Barnette was decided, wonderful case. As a result of Barnette, the Supreme Courts in Argentina, Canada, Costa Rica, Ghana, India, the Philippines, and Rwanda all followed Barnette and all ruled in favor of school children in those countries. Just for example, in Canada in 1945, witness children before the Canada Supreme Court ruled in favor of them had been sent to foster homes, and some witness parents were sentenced to jail. In Argentina in 1979, the Supreme Court handed down a decision exonerating or in favor of Jehovah's Witnesses for their refusal to salute the flag. Now, do you know what, ladies and gentlemen, what's fascinating about this? Listen to me. At the time that the Argentina Supreme Court handed down its decision, the worship of Jehovah's Witnesses in Argentina was under ban. So the Supreme Court said, even though it's illegal to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses, if you happen to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses, the state cannot obligate you to salute a flag. Now, that case not only resulted in a favorable ruling for Alejandro Wilma, but over 1,000 other Jehovah's Witnesses who were facing trial in Argentina because of their beliefs. So now I'm going to wrap up with one episode. I really hope that you listen to me about this. So there are 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses around the world, and it's not easy being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. There are 230 Jehovah's Witnesses in prison right now. 53 are in jail in Eritrea, 3 of them for over 25 years. But there's also Jehovah's Witnesses in jail, 117 in South Korea, 9 in Singapore, over 40 in Russia, and 11 in Turkmenistan. And I want to just wrap up by telling you about Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, because this is what I'm talking about when I say the battle continues. So there's 175,000 Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. Many are third and fourth generation witnesses. Records confirm that Jehovah's Witnesses started worshiping in Russia in 1891. They had legal status for a while until the Russian Revolution in 1917, and they were under ban. From then on, 1917 until 1991, to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses meant you could go to a communist gulag like this. Literally tens of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses lived their lives in Siberia because they refused to relent with their faith. Now, in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Jehovah's Witnesses gained legal status again. And during this period, there was a peaceful era for a while for Jehovah's Witnesses. But the Orthodox Church went after Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Soviet authorities backed the Orthodox Church. As a result, in 2017, Jehovah's Witnesses were once again banned. Now let's just pause a minute. How would the Russian Constitution guarantees freedom of religion? So how do you ban 175,000 people? They started by saying this: the literature that they have is extremist because it says that you have to obey the Bible. And some of the things in the Bible the government doesn't agree with. Does that sound familiar? Does the Finnish mystery come to mind? It's the same thing, what was happening in 1918 in the United States as what's happening in Russia today. The literature was declared extremist. Then those who produce and distribute the literature were declared extremists. By the way, when I mean extremists, on that list is Al-Qaeda. So the Russian authorities equate being one of Jehovah's Witnesses to being a member of Al-Qaeda. So then, if you happen to meet and gather to read this literature, you're also extremist. So what's happening to Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia today? Let me show you.
Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted in the fascist era, but quite curiously, They were not persecuted for being extremist, quite the contrary. They were persecuted for being pacifist and not wanting to cooperate in the fascist regime military rhetoric and militarization of the society. So in a way they were persecuted for not being extremist. So when I hear that they are persecuted in Russia for being extremist, it impresses me as something quite ridiculous, talking of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Many of these repressive mechanisms are invented not for a specific group, but for some other threat, not religious, but political. And often later they are applied in quite an unexpected way.
I never met one single expert who does not agree that what Russia is doing to Jehovah's Witnesses is illegal on the basis of the international convention Russia subscribed.
This means that all of, well, at least the adult Jehovah's Witnesses may potentially be criminally prosecuted. There is not a single democratic country with this kind of a mechanism.
So this is sobering. You wake up thinking that fundamental freedoms exist and always will. But this is happening to the largest religious minority in Russia as we speak. So when we get back to that point, Jehovah's Witnesses, canaries in the coal mine of human rights. If the global community does not stand up for Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, what will happen to the rights of others in Russia? If the rights of Jehovah's Witnesses are undermined in Russia, what about the rights of others? So as you think about what you've heard today, the wonderful decision in Barnette, please don't put this down as just an interesting historic fact, something that doesn't have a lot of relevance in your life. It actually has quite a lot of relevance in your life, because as we mentioned, the battle continues.
Specific thank you to all of you who've made this a special event, the 75th anniversary of the West Virginia versus Barnette. And hopefully it's a teaching moment for all of the students who were here, who acted so patiently and wonderfully. You could hear a pin drop, and let me tell you, that doesn't always happen when you're dealing with a large crowd. And I applaud all of you for that attention to detail. So go back and think about the Barnette case. Think about the fact that it was authored by a guy here from Jamestown, New York, and it's had international impact. And it's oft quoted, but let me conclude with this. If there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. Justice Robert H. Jackson, thank you for coming.